Okay, morning everybody. Welcome to this first of these conferences. I think it's a real pleasure for me and a real privilege for me to be invited to sort of open this. I think probably it's about 14 years ago when we first started the Positive Choices Conference. It was great to be at that first conference and have the opportunity to speak there. So actually being here for this event is fantastic. There's sort of pros and cons to being given a sort of like a blank page for speaking. You think, well, okay, fine, I could speak about what I want, and then it's like, oh, right, okay, so what do I speak about? And my task was really to set the scene for the day. And I suppose for myself, there's a couple of challenges I've got to face. One is trying not to bang my microphone too much when I'm speaking, because anybody that knows me will know I tend to wave my arms around, so I'm trying to keep those out of sight. And the second is to make sure that I do stick to time, because I think we've got the changeover to mix it afterwards, and I think that's being sort of streamed in, so that will be a challenge. But I thought if we could just sort of spend some time to think about changes, challenges and opportunities, and to think about how we might then sort of address some of these. I thought if we start with the challenges, a lot of these are pretty well rehearsed. I think we probably know about them. There's an awful lot at the moment in terms of the challenges of the workforce. We know that in some areas we've got perhaps decreasing numbers of people working within our area of specialism. There are issues around recruitment to education. Some of us, and I'm including myself in this, are perhaps getting older. We need to make sure that we've got the younger workforce coming through. So lots of challenges there about making sure we have the right people in the right place at the right time with the right skills. We've still got some challenges, I think, about perceptions, about, probably hands up at those of you that have had, so what do learning disability nurses do? Yeah? It's great to get 100% response rate. Okay, so we've all had that. And no matter how many times we sort of try and sort of say, okay, so this is what we do, it is difficult. And I think one of the challenges is that quite often we're not visible in perhaps the media and things like that. When people talk about nursing, if there was something on the news tonight about nursing, the picture that they would have would be of a nurse working in an acute hospital, wearing a uniform, probably putting up a drip, giving out tablets or something like that. They would never sort of have a big nursing story where they put up a picture of a learning disability nurse or perhaps a mental health nurse visiting somebody at home and talking with them. And so the perceptions of the public really don't always match, if we want, what we do. So we've got a challenge there. How do we try and make sure that people are more aware of what we do? Resources, I don't need to tell you, financial resources are tight, probably getting tighter. We're constantly challenged perhaps to do more with what we have. And I suppose the challenge is there, if we're not going to have more, maybe it's about working more smartly rather than doing more, because we can't always do more. And it may be, perhaps, some of the challenges are about thinking about if we're going to do new things, what do we give up doing? Because I think constantly we take on new things and we think, yeah, great, but we don't always think about how do we move forward and perhaps lose some of those things which we have been doing. In terms of education, we've got certainly within the UK and I believe also within Ireland, there are challenges in terms of changing curricula. We have to think now about how we're going to prepare nurses, not just for the next couple of years, but actually into the next decade and beyond. And that's going to be quite challenging. And I think there's probably two elements there. How do we make sure that we really maintain that sort of specific focus on a specialism supporting people with a learning or intellectual disability, whilst at the same time making sure that all nurses are actually adequately prepared to work with people and to support people with an intellectual disability. And then the final one I've got here, and there's probably lots of others I could have put up, but the final one I've got here is about complexity. We work in an increasingly complex world. Complexity of services. Where the days when perhaps when I first qualified and it was a case of you went to work in this service and it was which part of that service do you want to work in. There's lots of different areas which nurses are working in, lots of different services. Even if we're not working in those services, we're working with a lot of other services, and that brings its own complexities. but also complexity of need. You know, we're seeing perhaps a number of changes, children and young people coming through with very, very complex health needs. How do we support them to lead healthy and fulfilling lives? And the other end of the scale, people with a learning disability, yes, they still do die earlier than the general population, but we also know that life expectancy is going up. And we also know that some of the problems which the general population face in terms of ageing happen for people with a learning disability earlier. So how do we try and perhaps do preventative work? How do we try and enable people to age well? Challenges often bring change, or they probably should bring change. And there's a number of reactions to change. Yeah? First of all, threat, panic. Yeah? We don't want this. People dig their heels in and that's it. Yeah? We retreat and we sort of put up the sort of barriers and think that's it. People also get quite concerned about risk. Yeah? What's this going to mean? What's this going to mean for me personally? What's this going to mean for the people I work with? What's it going to mean for the services which I work within? But change also brings opportunities. Yeah? If we don't change and we keep doing the same things, we don't get progress. So, thinking about change, and I thought long and hard about this. How did I represent this? And I think we normally think about the present, that's here, and we might think a bit about the future. But what I want you to think about is that at any point, if you want the present, we've got the legacy of the past, and we also have got the plans for the future. So that means in the present, we're dealing with both. Yeah? So if I give you an example, when I first started my sort of nurse education back last century, I was working in a long-stay institution. And we had the long legacy of institutional care and some of the inquiries and things like that, and everything that brought with it. But at the same time, people were talking about this thing called community. And people were beginning to develop community nursing posts. And then we'd also got situations where people were thinking about actually moving people, these people that had been in a hospital for a long time, actually moving them into this thing called the community. And I can still remember, even though we were, as I was going through my sort of 3 years, wards were closing. And I can still remember one particular charge nurse who, as wards were closing, was saying, they'll never close this place. It's not going to happen. Never happen, won't work. That place now is actually a housing estate where this hospital was, and I'm just wondering whether he still sat there on the piece of grass in the middle saying, they'll never close this place. But what I'm trying to get at is at any point in time, we're going to want people, as well as people who perhaps are wanting to hang on to the past, we're also going to have people who are wanting to go headlong into the future. And sometimes there's that tension. Yeah? If we're going to go into the future, if we're going to develop things, we really need to think about how we do it, and we need to do it in a planned and measured way. And I think the thing is as well, that when I look at the sort of present, and I look back, I find myself thinking, did we really do that? But when I'm talking with students, I sort of say to them, well, actually, if I was to come into the room in 10 years' time and say to you, and ask you to look back, I want you to be saying, did we really do that? Because if we're not saying that, things haven't changed, we haven't moved on. And one of the people I like, I think she said some fantastic things, is Maya Angelou. And I like this quote, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And when I look back, we were doing what we thought was the best thing at the time, but we now know better, and we need to move on. So how do we do that? How do we try and turn some of these challenges and these changes into opportunities? So, I know everybody's probably familiar with the 6 C's. I couldn't get things which were 6 whatever, so we're going to have to stick with change it. Probably goes well into mix it afterwards, so, okay. What do we need to do? I think we need to think about how we challenge and communicate effectively. We said about perceptions. What are the communications which we are using? How are we communicating to other people? How are we challenging? Looking and saying, okay, things need to change, but doing it in the right way. You know, because we've probably all come across, I mean, it never ceases to amaze me that probably the two things which are written about most in terms of management are leadership and management of change. And they seem to be the two things which we still do incredibly badly. Yeah? You know, messages don't always go out to the right people at the right time in the right format. So we need to think about how do we do that. And thinking about different messages to different people. You know? If you think about what I said about complexity, there's going to be a lot of people involved in some of these changes. One size doesn't fit all. We need to think about how we use our communication skills, and that should be something we're pretty good at. You know, we tend to sort of pride ourselves on communication skills. So we need to think about how we use that, not just if you want for the people that we support, but actually more widely. Because if we want to support people effectively, we've actually got to have change in the system, and we need to be working within that. One of the sort of the theme for the day is about, you know, values. And I think in amongst change, it's really important to hold on to your values. Sometimes in change and when we get challenges, those values are challenged. People will want to do things in a way which perhaps doesn't always sit comfortably with us. And I think it's really important in those times that we step back, we think, we reflect, and we think about actually what are our values? What are the key things, the core things as to why we do what we do? What is it that we need to hang on to? What is it we need to aim for? Advocate. Yeah, we need to think about how we advocate for people, for change, for development, for resources, you name it. There's a long list of things which we need to think about advocating for, but also supporting others to advocate for themselves. Yeah? Sometimes it's not always about what we do directly, it's about how we enable other people. And I think advocacy is one of those important areas. But I would also put a plea in there, and I've already said about communicating. Yeah? Advocacy is only effective really if other people are listening. And so when people do advocate, we also need to listen. Network effectively and collaborate. This is a fantastic opportunity for that. I think if I've learnt one thing over my career, it's about the importance of linking with other people. We've got a tremendous amount of experience in this room. Yeah? Hands up those of you who have been registered for less than 5 years. Anybody? Quite a few. Okay. What about those of you that have been registered between 5 and, say, 20 years? A few more. Okay, now the real one. Hands up who's going to own up to having been registered for more than 20 years. Okay. Now, I'm a qualitative researcher by background, so I don't usually go into numbers. But if I was to add up the numbers of years of experience in this room, that's an incredible amount of experience. We all work in different settings. We've all had different experiences. We're all trying new things. We're all trying to develop. If we can actually network effectively and collaborate around some of that, just think about the change we could effect. I think if I have a criticism, I think it's sometimes in our enthusiasm, we spend a lot of time reinventing wheels. And we really think, okay, I've got to spend a lot of energy in developing this. And then you go to something and you find that somebody 10 miles down the road from you has also been putting a lot of energy into developing something which is pretty similar. If we could actually join forces on that, we could be more effective. Yeah? We may be a small group within the wider field of nursing, but actually we've got incredible opportunities there to collaborate and to effect change. And also, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, not just collaborating with other learning disability nurses. Yeah, we need to think about networking effectively. So one of my challenges is also to keep to time, so I'm having to look on that. Generate opportunities. You know, I've come across people and sort of said, oh, well, there's no opportunities. Yeah, can't do this, can't do that. Make them. Yeah? Generate them. Make sure that you look for them. You know, sometimes they're not always going to be presented. But actually, if we look and we think and we use our networks and we look for things which we can do, there's lots of opportunities there to develop. We need to think about those. And I think this one's really, really important. You know, there's quite a lot written about, you know, stress within the healthcare sector, you know, staff working under incredible pressure. And then somebody comes along and says, oh, I've got a great idea, we want to change things. Within that, we need to encourage other people and we need to support our colleagues as well. And I think, again, nursing hasn't always been that good for that. Yeah, sometimes, when people have wanted to sort of take things further forward, other people have, sort of shot them down. Again, how many of you have been in a situation where you've sort of suggested something and you've had the, yeah, we tried that before, didn't work. Or you get the, and I think this is actually probably even more worrying, where you can try it if you want, and you know that, okay. But I think if we can encourage people, if we can, share other people's successes, celebrate other successes, tell other people about it, encourage people to tell other people about it, it makes things better for everybody. Okay, infiltrate, inspire and innovate. Infiltrate was something which came up in a discussion which I was in last week, and I think a couple of people here probably were in the same discussion, where somebody said, I've managed to infiltrate into. Yeah? I think that's a really important skill that we need to develop. I spent the beginning of this week at the RCM Research Conference, because for the last sort of few years I've had the privilege of chairing the RCM Research Society. And I made a deliberate decision a few years ago that I work with the RCN Learning Disability Forum, and I've done work with them and supported that. But actually, I was going to try and get myself onto the Research Society Steering Committee, because I felt really, really strongly that learning disability nurses, intellectual disability nurses, need to be represented in all these other areas as well. And as Ben said, I mean, I first met Ben and worked with Ben on a Health and Social Policy Committee. Think about that, infiltrate that. I think, people sort of say, oh, we don't always have a chair at the table. And then somebody else sort of says, well, actually bring your own chair. Yeah? We need to be thinking about getting ourselves in there. If there is something about nursing, get ourselves there, get our voices heard. That's the way in which not only, will we get sort of professional recognition, but more importantly, the sort of needs of our clients will actually get represented within the wider field of nursing. And not just within nursing. Yeah, think about other areas where you can get into, other groups that you can join, conferences you can go to. It's great, I think, something like this is really, really great because we can share as learning disability nurses, as intellectual disability nurses, and there is that sort of, I suppose, sense of belongingness and actually strength from actually meeting with each other. But we also need to be getting out and we need to be infiltrating. Inspire, inspire other people. Try and help other people and innovate. Learning disability nurses are incredibly creative, incredibly innovative. But sometimes when you go along, you say, actually, that's really great what you've done there. It's like, well, it's just what I do. Yeah? We need to be trying to promote that more. Yeah? Demonstrate our innovation. Get out there. Show what we do. And I think lastly, it's about thinking critically. Sometimes when we talk about thinking critically, people tend to think that means criticism. What I'm trying to sort of encourage people to do there is to think critically instead, is to look at things and to recognize when something needs to change. What is it that needs to change? How does it need to change? But also to recognize what's good. Yeah? Sometimes things don't need to change, but we need to be able to articulate why. We need to be able to say, we need to hang on to this because. So it is that thinking critically, being aware of different arguments. You may not always agree with other arguments, but if we're going to go back to the first one, challenge and communicate effectively, we need to know what those other arguments are. And we need to be able to handle that. And to do that, we need to think critically. So, and I am keeping an eye on time. My challenges for you today, it's got me well trained. My challenges for you today, first of all, I said about networking. Now, I know a lot of you will know each other, and I had to be very careful at the beginning to say, oh, well, not to say it's good to see some old faces, because some people might take offense at that, but it's good to see some familiar faces in the audience, but it's also good to see some new faces. So one of the things I would be saying to you is use this opportunity to actually spend time talking with at least one person you haven't met. Find out about them, who they are, what they do, where they work, what are some of the challenges that they face, what are some of the things which they're doing and innovating. Exchange emails, yeah, network, Twitter, whatever, but make sure you do that. Make good use of the opportunity. Look at the experience we have in the room. Yeah, use it. It's great to come on days like today, but I think one of the things which is sometimes difficult is we'll get enthused, particularly on a Friday. You'll go home, you'll have the weekend, and you'll go into work on Monday and you'll think, oh, right, okay. So what I want you to do today is to think of at least one thing you're going to do differently. Yeah? Write it down, maybe tell somebody else about it. Yeah? Because if you're anything like me, if you say to other people you're going to do it, you tend to do it. Yeah? If you just tell yourself, you can fool yourself into thinking, oh, it's not important. But commit to doing something differently. And the last one, I probably should have put recommit, but commit to putting your values into action. Now, think about what those values are, reaffirm your values whilst you're here, and then think about how you're going to use that going forward. So,
well done.
You're impressed.